Ugh, where is she? We were supposed to start training 15 minutes ago. Kana, where are you?
Hey, Chibi! Sorry I'm late. I was just looking for something that'd be useful for training. I went looking on that one computer thingy you use to buy things.
Computer thingy?
Yeah, you know, oh wait, oh that's it, eBunny!
No, Kana. I think you mean eBay. eBony is a different thing entirely. A very different thing. And besides, I wouldn't use Mother's credit card if I were you. She will get cross with you. Believe me, I would know.
Aww, but there's something I really need. It's that belt thing that can make me henshin.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and assume that a weapon with power such as that isn't going to be as easy to obtain as just looking it up on eBay. And besides, you don't need that rubbish for your training. If you're going to protect Mother, you should try to learn to fight in a more practical way. Not just use something to get yourself out of a tight spot.
But Chibi, I would look so cool, and I would know for sure that I'd be able to help Mommy.
Yes, you'd know for sure, but what about if you didn't have it with you? What would you do then? If your goal is to protect Mother, then you need to think of all the possibilities. Don't just think of the easy way out.
You're right. I can't just rely on a belt to help me save Mommy. I need to be stronger myself. Thank you so much, Chibi.
Not a problem. Just a correction though, this is only for if Mother ever finds herself in any trouble. That's not something you'll have to worry about anytime soon.
But we can't be sure, so let's go train, Chibi! Woohoo!
And there she goes. Not something you'll have to worry about. Wish I could believe that. But at the very least we'll have this just in case.
Hello everybody, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome once again to Zen Movies, where I take a look at one of the numerous different films in my collection. Subsequently, welcome my subjects to the first installment of Zenoween. Throughout all of October, both this year and for the years to come, we'll be taking a look at spooky movies, video games, and TV shows of all kinds to celebrate the gloomy festivities. And for this very first episode of Zenoween, we are diving into the world of a cult classic where monsters are real and must be stopped at all cost, lest they destroy the entire world. It is time to enter another world and another time as we discuss Jim Henson's 1982 film, The Dark Crystal. The Dark Crystal is a strange entity in and of itself because it doesn't quite feel like a Jim Henson production. Up until this point, Henson primarily worked on children's television programming, including Sesame Street, The Muppets, and Fraggle Rock. For those few of you who are unfamiliar with Henson, he was primarily a puppeteer by trade and is known for creating some of the most well-known characters in children's entertainment, including Kermit the Frog, Ernie from Sesame Street, and Rolf the Dog, just to name a few. However, that's just scratching the surface because Henson was also a cartoonist, animator, actor, inventor, singer, composer, filmmaker, and screenwriter. He was a multi-talented individual who dedicated his life to producing some truly wonderful pieces of entertainment, but they tended to be aimed at a younger demographic. Even the Muppets, which could get a bit more adult in some cases, were intended to be family friendly and rarely got dark. Then, out of nowhere, Henson gives us the Dark Crystal, and it came as a bit of a shock to audiences at the time. Instead of lighthearted puppets telling jokes, we have a fantasy epic that was dark, depressing, and full of imagery that would scare the pants off of any child unlucky enough to watch the film. Keep in mind, The Dark Crystal was marketed as a family film at the time, even though some of these scenes feel like they're straight out of a horror film. When I first saw this film for my original review back on the old channel, I was not prepared for the mood whiplash that this movie created. From all that I had seen of Henson and his fellow puppeteer, Frank Oz, his library was colorful and vibrant and fun to travel through. Even Labyrinth, which is a tad darker than his usual creations, contained tons of levity and scenes of outright joy. I mean, between Dance Magic Dance and David Bowie saying the phrase, "Nothing, nothing, tra-la-la," Labyrinth became accessible for a family audience, even with the darker material. Note to self, review Labyrinth in the future just to see Bowie say that line again, because that is awesome. Anyway, The Dark Crystal is a very different film for Henson and Oz, which is perhaps the reason why this film was originally requested for me to review. Back on the old channel, before Toei and the copyright bots forced me to abandon ship and start over from scratch with pictures and puppet rigs instead of movie footage, I allowed patrons of a certain tier to request one video every few months. This is something I've thought about bringing back to the new channel, but it really depends on getting some of these old videos remade, and we would have to do it in a way that wouldn't disrupt the schedule that Philip and I have created. No joke, we've scheduled pretty much everything up to 2022, and so far we've actually managed to stick to it for the most part. So, if I were to bring back patron requests in the future, it would most likely be for later on in the schedule, where we can shift things around a bit. In any case, this was originally a patron request from Ryan Walterson, who has another request that we will get to in the future. Walterson appears to be a big fan of Henson's work, which makes two of us because I also really love Henson. Hell, I also created a show with a bunch of different moving puppets, so Henson was a bit of an inspiration for this show. With all that being said, let's dive into The Dark Crystal and see what this film is all about, and possibly find out why Walterson patroned this specific film out of Henson's extensive library. This, my friends, is The Dark Crystal. To be perfectly honest, the plot of The Dark Crystal is exceedingly simple and is very reminiscent of fantasy films of the time period. On an unknown planet with 3 suns, a crystal exists that protects the balance of life on the planet. When the crystal's power wanes, so too does the life on the planet. However, 1,000 years ago, the crystal cracked, and a shard of the crystal went missing, causing the crystal to turn black. When the crystal shattered, an alien race known as the Urskek were split into 2 as well, with their negative side becoming the evil Skeksis and their good halves becoming the wise mystics. The Skeksis used the Dark Crystal in order to drain life from the planet, from the suns, and from the very people that inhabit it. However, a prophecy arose that a Gelfling native to the planet would rise up and defeat the Skeksis once and for all, so the Skeksis wiped out all Gelfling on the planet, or so they thought, for 2 Gelflings still live, allowing hope to continue on. When the leader of the Mystics dies of old age, he sends his Gelfling ward Jen to find the Crystal Shard and heal the Dark Crystal. Along the way, he meets Kira, a female Gelfling raised by podlings, and together they set out to destroy the remaining Skeksis, heal the Dark Crystal, and return the world to its former glory. That is the plot of the film in a nutshell, and it may sound familiar to you because it does have very similar tropes and writing cliches from many other big fantasy films at the time. Evil empires being taken down by rebels, a world in decay, the last of a dying race being tasked to save the world. These are all tired tropes for modern audiences, although I'm not sure how fresh these ideas were at the time. Today, the plot comes across as simple and cliche, but I wouldn't call the base plot bad. It does a good job of drawing you into the world, but the plot takes a backseat to the world itself, and that is a bit of a problem. When creating the Dark Crystal, Henson started with the world since his head was overflowing with ideas, and he spent the majority of his time making the world and characters come to life. They then had a script editor come in and tie everything together, and I do feel the plot suffers a bit because of it. There are two main issues I have with the plot, to be honest, and they're both related to the script itself. First of all, the Dark Crystal is very vague about the details of this world. There are a lot of things that I would like to know about this world, but we aren't told them. I don't know the name of the planet itself or how the Skeksis got into power. I don't know the names of the locations because most of the time they are referred to as, say, the Skeksis Palace or Agra's home, and we never learn anything beyond that. I don't know the name of many of these creatures unless they are briefly mentioned in passing. It feels like there needed to be more lore here because so much of it rushes by without explanation, and while I can follow pretty easily, it becomes hard to understand at times. I mean, I didn't really understand what the Dark Crystal did the first time watching the film, and I had to basically look up that it was essentially a crystal from Final Fantasy that was tied to the world itself. It's not that the lore isn't there per se. I've seen the behind the scenes making of featurettes on the Blu-ray, and they explain a lot, but if you're just watching the film, there's so much that's left vague and confusing. I think part of this is because Henson was so focused on the main feature of this film, the puppetry. I'll go into detail about the puppets themselves in a bit, but Henson's vision was to create a film composed entirely of puppets with no humans whatsoever, and he wanted to give each race a unique language. Because of this, his focus was on making the puppets as expressive as possible, and it was his belief that the puppeteers could make the creatures expressive enough that we didn't need to understand the language to know what was going on in the film. That was, unfortunately, one of the big mistakes of the movie, in my opinion. It was certainly ambitious to say the least, but when sent to test audiences, nobody could tell what was going on or what the creatures were saying. These test scenes were shown on the Blu-ray, and man, I can't tell what's going on at all. This may be why the film is so vague on details. Henson wanted to have the world speak for itself, and while I see that ambition, really I do, it ends up being too vague for me even with the added dialogue. Speaking of which, let's discuss the second problem, which relates to the dialogue itself. The film is overwritten at points and comes off as a bit too experimental as a result. When Henson sent out the test footage and audiences couldn't tell what was going on, dialogue was added to the scenes to add context. In some cases, this works really well, such as with the Skeksis. They are perfectly dubbed over, which is impressive considering they didn't reshoot these scenes, but instead matched the dialogue to the lip flaps. However, in most cases, I feel they overcompensated and made each scene feel bloated with too much dialogue. Far more than was needed for these scenes. In that opening narration alone, they repeat information all the time. They tell us the world and people are dying multiple times, and it becomes redundant. There comes a point when you have to cut out or cut down lines because all these lines do is repeat what you already said or what audiences can gather just by watching the film. Take it from me, I'm a massive windbag and my editor cuts down my scripts by at least a page or two because you need to streamline or your audience will start feeling annoyed.
And yet you still end up with 40-minute long videos.
Philip, You realize you're only adding time onto this video, right?
Sorry, carry on.
This problem also comes into play with the Gelfling. They were always supposed to speak English, so their regular speaking lines were perfectly fine, but they also took a page from Dune and gave us Jen's thoughts, and I feel that was a huge mistake. Don't get me wrong, hearing a character's thoughts can help us understand more of what's going on, but Jen's thoughts are also redundant and unnecessary. There's a part where Jen is starting out on his journey and thinks to himself, I'm not ready to go alone, but then immediately after thinks, fine, alone then. We didn't need this in the first place, and I think a large portion is either contradictory or just stuff we can see from the visuals. That's just the strange thing to me about The Dark Crystal. It's both overwritten and underwritten at the same time because Henson had a visual idea of what he wanted and then had to stop and change at the last minute. It really is a shame because I do see pieces of a good story here, and near the third act it solidifies into something that I do enjoy, but everything leading up to it is uncertain. That's the right word for it, uncertain. It's two clashing tones and methodologies, and this clash can be weird. I mean, we go from this overblown narration where too much is explained to the infamous girl scene where it's suddenly revealed that Kira can fly, and it's explained as just, oh, I'm a girl, we can do that. We go from the Skeksis spelling out their plan to Agra, the keeper of the crystal shard, telling Jen questions, too many questions, when he asks valid questions that I would like to know the answers to. I want to like this story because at its base level, it's pretty good, but these two glaring problems really make the film drag in places, so in the end, the story is just okay. It's not bad, it works as a generic fantasy plot, but I can't get much out of it, and too much of the time it's just saying the same thing over and over, or not telling us enough about this world. Unfortunately, the characters fare pretty much the same because I can't get any character from this cast. Aside from their fantasy role, what character do they possess? Jen and Kira are just Gelfling whose parents were killed by Skeksis, but it doesn't come into the story in any meaningful way. They never yearn for revenge or deal with it, and so there really is no character to them. The Mystics all feel the same, and while I love the vibe they give off, we only ever see one of them talk to Jen, and he dies immediately afterwards. So while visually I enjoy the Mystics, I can't say anything about their character because we don't know them outside of what they taught Jen and what we learn about them from Jen, which isn't all that much. Then there's the Skeksis, who are all enjoyably conniving and evil, but not to sound racist, but I can't tell them apart. They all look and behave the same, and while upon a second viewing I could somewhat see subtle differences, the only one I knew was the Chamberlain because he's the only one who's banished at the start. While the Skeksis are really cool puppets, they are over-designed with all the trinkets and chains and objects that they bleed into one another, so while it is fun to watch them be dicks to one another, I couldn't single out one Skeksis that actually stood out as a character. The only character in this film that I found truly memorable was Agra, but not because she had a fully fleshed out character, no. Agra is just as vague as the others, but what works about her is her dialogue. She's so eccentric, going around and spouting what seems like nonsense but is actually important info, and talking a bit like Yoda. Hell, she even stands up to the Skeksis and they're afraid of her. Agra has just enough personality to get her by, but overall, it's just one character out of the film, and that's not enough. I enjoyed watching these characters and their interactions, but I can't tell you enough about them, and that is also a big issue. We have no one to latch onto, nobody to relate to, because these are all just first drafts. They haven't gotten any any development, and I don't believe anyone develops over the course of the film. They do stuff, yes, but nothing comes out of it character-wise, and it's all just a means to an end. A college professor would look at this and say, okay, this is a good first draft, but you need to add in more to these people because why should we care about them? It's cool to see these people, and I understand their struggle, but what more is there? That is perhaps the largest failing of the film. There's just not enough to these characters, and I don't really care. So if I find the story okay at best, and the characters non-existent, the only thing left to look for is presentation. With that being said, The Dark Crystal gets by on presentation alone because this film is a revolution when it comes to practical effects. One can easily tell that Henson focused on the world first because, dear God, this world is so beautiful and fully realized. This is a world created solely by puppetry, and I don't think any film has done anything quite like this before or since. Everything moves and breathes and feels alive. The closer you look, the more detail you find, but you can never find the seams. I spent a large portion of the film looking for any fault with the puppetry. I looked for strings in actors' hands or something to break the illusion, but it never happened. It is clear from looking at the visuals of this film and the making of featurettes that this was a passion project from a puppeteer who just wanted to make a lush fantasy world. Henson wanted to just bring a world to life, and while there are just so many problems with it as a film, as a work of art, this is beyond anything I've ever seen before. Again, no humans are present in the film itself. Everything was operated by a huge team of puppeteers, and every little tiny movement was taken into consideration. This was a huge project, and visually they pulled it off. I got lost in the world of the Dark Crystal, and I think that's enough. While I could make some critiques of the puppets, such as the faces of the Gelfling ultimately feeling a bit jarring to the world, that actually was the point of their design, to create a bridge between the natural creatures of this world and the fantastical elements of the mystics and the Skeksis, and so I feel a little bit out of my depth here. I'm not a puppeteer or a designer, but what we have here is simply incredible. As for the music, I think it works for what the film is going for, complete with some good fantasy themes, but the puppetry is what makes the Dark Crystal what it is. Honestly, I'm not sure what more I can say about the Dark Crystal without coming across as redundant as the film itself. As a film, I don't think it's enjoyable enough to grab your attention, and there's a ton of weird choices that give it a stamp of just okay. It's not bad, but it just doesn't have enough that works for me to give it a kinda stamp of approval as a film. However, I still recommend this for what it set out to be, for its historical value, advancements in puppetry and visuals, and just the passion that went into it. I give The Dark Crystal a kinda stamp of approval based on its contribution to art. You may not enjoy it the first time through, but I think it's a film that everyone needs to see at least once. But don't just take my word for it. I asked my good friend Roots of Justice to give his thoughts on the film. So, what do you think, Roots?
Hello, Zen. And hello, YouTube. The Dark Crystal is a great example of how extensive world building and unique storytelling techniques can take a pretty boilerplate high fantasy plotline and evolve it into something that still strikes the imagination even nearly 40 years later. The removal of the human element to create an entirely alien world was a pretty big gamble. But let's be real, Jim Henson and Frank Oz are probably the only two people on the planet who could have made a film starring nothing but puppets, and somehow got it to work. I don't think that's a fluke either. Frank Oz's meticulous directorial style would later influence how he tackled films such as Gosford Park and especially Little Shop of Horrors. That being said, the actual story of the film, in my opinion, leans a little too close to the Joseph Campbell hero's journey archetype, where the mentor dies, the hero is sent on a quest, and more often than not has to collect a MacGuffin, meet some travel companions, and then do the thing they may or may not, depending on the story, be destined to do. Also, while the physical performances may be some of the best puppeteer work performed during the tragically cut short life of Jim Henson, your mileage may vary on whether Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles counts or not, the vocal performances can be a little hit or miss. Still, those are minor nitpicks in the grand scheme. Unlike a bunch of 80s films that really only hold together through the sheer grit of nostalgia, The Dark Crystal, mainly through its creative use of puppeteering and visual aesthetic, stands the test of time. It is truly a wonder to behold. And thank you, Zen, for having me on this video. You can catch me, Roots of Justice, as a contributor on the Dub Talk podcast, available via YouTube, Podbean, Spotify Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts.
Thank you very much for your time, Roots. With all that being said, I think The Dark Crystal, while problematic, is a film that deserves to be in everyone's collection because of how it advanced filmmaking technology, puppetry, and world building in film. It was an exceedingly ambitious project, and I don't think it quite paid off in the end, but what we got was magnificent and worthy of being in your collection. I hope you enjoyed this updated review, Ryan Walterson, and thank you so much for making this episode possible. The Dark Crystal is distributed by Universal Pictures and is quite easy to find on Amazon in whatever format you prefer. Personally, I bought the Anniversary Edition Blu-ray, which is housed in a hardcover book format and contains an artwork and behind-the-scenes booklet that gives a ton of details about how this project came to be. Just an idea at the back of Henson's mind that he sat on for years until he could make it a reality. The film is probably as dark as it is because it was his first time with full creative control and he could actually do what he wanted. He wanted to make a dark fantasy film world, and so he did. The Anniversary Edition also comes with a ton of making of featurettes, behind the scenes on how they made the creatures, a look at Henson's idea and how he worked on it, and a look at the original test version without the dialogue for the creatures. I found it for $14, which is a steal at that price. If you're a film buff, like me, add the Anniversary Edition to your collection and you will be glad you did because it is so much bang for your buck. You're getting a lot. In any case, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and I will see you all next time. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you too can join the Bun Squad, my legion of cute, fluffy bunnies that enjoy my videos, and don't forget to hit that bell so that you get notified of every new video. Have a good one, everybody, and take care.
Did you really need to have me run a marathon?
Yes, I did. It's to improve your stamina.
And did you really need me to do 1,000 push-ups?
Yes. Once again, stamina, Kana.
And did I really need to go to the lake and catch all those fishies that I didn't get to eat?
Oh no, I was just hungry and saw the opportunity.
Why, you rotten...
Now, Kana. Don't let your anger get the best of you. You learned some valuable things today. Remember the knife lesson we had?
Yes, Chibi. Thank you. I'm just so exhausted. When do I get to learn how to henshin? I learned how to fight on my own, and now I want to henshin.
Oh no, there's more to do than the upcoming days. Now come along, we'll have you rest up and then it's on to one final task before wrapping up for today.
Man, this stinks. Why can't I just henshin now? Maybe Mommy changed her mind since last time and she'll buy me that belt thingy. Yeah, I know she will. After I tell her about all the training I've done, she'll buy it for me for sure.
I said come along, Kana. Stop standing around. Every time.
Wait, that's it? That's the end of the video? Wait, hold on a second here. So you put together this pretty good tribute to the Dark Crystal movie, but you didn't even begin to scratch the surface, like just cover the wide swath of influence that Jim Henson had during his time. And yes, people know him for the Dark Crystal movie, more so for Sesame Street and the Muppets, but that doesn't even begin to cover it. Like, you want to talk about something that's non-kid friendly? Like, the Dark Crystal, sure, that's for kids. But you know what was really not for kids? Sam and Friends. Yeah, back in the 50s, like back when Jim Henson and his wife Jane were still in college, they had started working with puppetry on this show called Sam and Friends. It was like this 5-minute show on Washington, local television show, and it was just full of pop culture, political, and dark humor references. Like, they called it sick humor, I think, back at the time. And it was, like, super popular. It was, let me try to say, it was way better than anything else that 50s television animation was doing around that time period. It was really bizarre. And that got them, like, so popular they even started getting calls to be on, like, talk shows as well and, like, start performing there. So, you know, start from there and then move on to other stuff that, you know, you'd never see that. You'd never see a puppet show on television with that low of a budget nowadays. You wouldn't see that. And you know what else you wouldn't see anymore? Puppet commercials. Yeah, before they actually really started getting into like full-length TV shows and movies, Jim Henson and his team were making commercials using their puppets that was like way more violent than I think anyone else was able to do at the time period. And I don't even know if they sold a lot of coffee and chow mein and coffee and whatever else they were advertising at the time period. But let me tell you, you would never forget a commercial that has a giant Muppet dragon crashing through the screen or people threatening to blow up the screen if you don't buy their product. In fact, I may go out there and buy some Wilson coffee right now. But that is just kind of like a taste of the kind of thing that they could do in short time periods. But you know what else they could do? You could stretch this out and they could be on actual television shows. Like, here's something no one ever talks about. Saturday Night Live. Yeah, that's right. The very first season, Henson and his team had a spot on the very first season of Saturday Night Live. So imagine this, like, you know, you put the kids to bed, it's Saturday night, you're done.